Now I'm going to offer you an off-ramp. Do you want to stop the episode here and like wrap it up and then keep going? Or do you want to just keep going and do edit points later?
What do you think? How do you feel?
I mean,
I'm kind of cool either way.
I could keep going, but if you want to wrap things up and call it.
What? Why don't we wrap it and then continue a conversation, and then I can always stitch it together in a random way, but we can wrap it here.
Or that could be how the episode ends.
Yeah, and then I could even like kind of throw out there that we're probably going to continue this conversation a little more, so stick around. Okay, cool,
that works. You want to do an outro or just keep going?
Yeah, I'll do a quick outro real quick. Hey everybody, welcome to Pursuing Pixels. My name's Kevin Portelli, and I'm here tonight with John Hines.
Hey there.
And it's just the two of us tonight. It's actually been a little while since we haven't had the full trifecta, since we've been shorthanded. But this week we figured both John and I have been pretty busy with our schedules lately, or with work and whatnot. Just hectic. I know, we got Labor Day coming up, so I know like our buddy Glenn's planning on coming to make a Chicago visit. Unfortunately, I was hoping to make it work, but I just started working this last couple weeks, so I'm just like, I'm a little fried. I've been doing some long drives and stuff, so I'm just like, oh man, I haven't had a ton of time to game, and I was hoping to visit with some friends, but I was like, I need to recuperate and make use of that extra day off this weekend. But in that regard, pretty much the stuff we've been playing is all like stuff that we've played before, talked about on the podcast. Mostly I've been dipping into a little bit more Pikmin 4. So John and I were talking right before this and saying, we were both kind of on the same page. Like, hey, why don't we just make it more like kind of a save it for the cast style episode, more conversational today. So if you haven't listened to those, we kind of do those on the off weeks and just trim it from like the conversation that we BS before or after we record our proper episodes. And we figured, hey, we'll just kind of chit chat tonight and talk some games, or like what we've been doing outside of games, wherever the conversation ends up going. Although I will say, just to start with some video game stuff, if you don't mind me taking the lead, I guess,
please.
John.
Go ahead.
But I've talked ad nauseum about the games from PUNKCAKE Délicieux. We've even had Remy DeVoe, one of the developers on the team there, on the podcast, interviewed a while back, which was a ton of fun and an honor to have them on the show. But I've been just such a huge fan of their stuff, and they've kind of gone a little quiet in recent months up until this last month or so. So when I talked about them a ton on the podcast, they had a Patreon, and they still do, and they were releasing a game every month. And
which is such an unsustainable pace.
Exactly.
I can't believe they did that.
Yeah, both them and Sokpop. And Sokpop actually just changed their plan. So I'll talk a little bit about both of that, because they just stopped doing monthly releases as well for different reasons. But so PUNKCAKE, it was sort of a little bit confusing the way that they announced like through their Patreon, they're like, hey, you probably have noticed that we haven't released any games in a while and we're like a little behind our schedule. So they like turned off their Patreon. Like, you're still subscribed, but you're just not getting like billed monthly until they reactivate it or whatever. So they're like, we're like 3 or 4 games behind. So if you've been a patron, like, you're going to get those automatically when we release them. And then they're like, after we do that, we're actually just going to take a full year off, and then we're going to go back to the next year. We're going to release a game every month the next year. So I was like, at first my reaction was like, why aren't they just going to do like a game every other month, or a game every 3 months, or why are they doing like turn it off for a year? But then I started thinking, I bet you they're just going to like simmer some ideas. Like, a lot of PUNKCAKE's releases so far have been like actually games that they originally either Benjamin Soule or Remy DeVoe, the two kind of lead developers that kind of take co-lead, or they each like kind of head up the games. It seems like they tag team them and work with Pentadrangle on the music as well now, which the other thing that they've been doing as of late, I'm just kind of scatterbrained here and just rambling about.
Please, no, this is literally what I wanted tonight, because
so they went from like being kind of quiet to just being like, okay, up until now, they've just released, like, Shotgun King was their biggest success. Like, they developed it originally, and I've talked about this game a bunch, or at least a few times on the podcast, and they developed it for the Ludum Dare Game Jam. It won that game jam. That's one of the bigger game jams out there. So because of that success, it actually ended up doing really, really well on Itch.io when they first, like, released it, and they'd done that before, but they ended up, or maybe that was the first time they turned a jam game into, like, a full release. I can't remember, but they've done that multiple times since, if not before, because I've talked about like the Turgenev study and a few. They have like 8 or 9, maybe even 10 games now, but they started recently releasing, I think Shotgun King was the first one, and then I think Moon Pong was the other one that they released on Steam. Otherwise, all their games were only available on itch up until now. But they, over the last like month or so, they've been like every couple weeks like putting out their first game, Anticrypt, then Metavax, then The Ratch's Den, then Rush of Ages. So they're bringing everything to Steam, and then alongside that, which kind of came out of nowhere, or at least I missed the announcement if they mentioned it before, but Shotgun King, they were like, is coming to consoles. It's coming to Switch, Xbox, PlayStation, everything. And they got a port done by Headbang Club is the studio or the publisher. I'm not sure exactly what they did, but they mentioned they were like they helped do some of the development. They actually, this Headbang Club made a tutorial, and they were like, you might notice that there's now a tutorial in a PUNKCAKE game. And they're like, and you'll also note that this game, they were like, it took them as long to make the tutorial as it took us to make the whole game.
Tutorials are so hard. Writing instructions are really difficult because how do you like... It is one thing to just go into a game and have like controls kind of be like immersive or something that like you can like kind of grasp on like by playing it. It is another thing to like write that out as like a flowing like set of commands that make sense. Like it is incredibly difficult to write.
And especially when it started out as a game jam game where you're kind of rushing it out, you're just kind of skipping over the tutorial. Hey, maybe we'll add it in later. But if you're building off of that foundation, you're kind of like, and now one difference too, like the game kind of, I think it on PC, it does work a little bit better as much as I definitely will. I've already played it a bunch more times. I've played maybe 2, 3, 4 more hours, and I'm actually doing pretty good so far. They've added a ton of new stuff since I played it last too. Like I played a little bit after like they commercially released it, but I actually mostly played like the Game Jam version of the game. But since then, because it was so successful, they've done a bunch of DLC for the game, or like patches and like updates to the game since it came out. And all of that's now in the new game. And maybe they even added stuff for this console release. I'm not 100% sure there, apart from the tutorial. But one thing that was nice about playing on PC is when you play it pretty much entirely with the mouse. There might be a couple keyboard hotkeys that I'm not remembering, but you can basically like hover over any piece and see what health they're at, or see what where you can move, and like right click on things, left click on things, and like just really easily like you pick up buffs and debuffs after every round. And basically, if you're not familiar with the game, you play as it's basically chess, but you play as just the king with a shotgun on your team. And then there's different upgrades. And that's one thing that
it's so good. It's such a great
I know, it's like so
concept.
silly and stupid, but it's like so expertly designed and done that it just works for some reason. And it's so cool to see like this is developed on their like proprietary sugar engine. I think they plan on releasing it eventually in some capacity. I don't know for sure, but I remember Remy talking about that a little bit on the podcast when they were on, that they were, they weren't sure what they were going to do with it, but they were planning on getting it out there in some capacity.
Kind of like, just as a quick side note, like I am so surprised that there aren't more like independent engines available. Like it kind of shocks me whenever like I hear something like Godot coming out and then being like, why isn't there more of this? Like I know like most people like if you're making a like high budget indie game, you're just going to use Unity, but like
or Game Maker even or something.
Right.
If it's 2D especially, yeah.
But like I'm just amazed that like there's not more, I don't know, weird esoteric game engines for people to make stuff on. It seems like kind of a like subgenre of, I don't know, game dev or... Yeah,
definitely. There's definitely a breed of developer that like, gets more into that kind of stuff as opposed to just developing games, and it's kind of cool because the Sugar engine was kind of like designed, and not to put words in any of their mouths or anything like that, but I recall Remy saying something to the effect of like, I basically just wanted to have like a juicier PICO-8 engine, with less limitations, and it kind of feels like that.
Oh
like
my god, that's a dream to me.
Yeah, it's amazing, and they still use, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think for everything, but like for their first few releases, and I think for still a lot of them, they use PICO-8 for like doing all the sound effects and stuff like that. Not the soundtrack and the music, but the sound effects. So. really, really cool stuff. So I've been really pumped to like, I'm really kind of rooting for them to like, I hope them bringing all their games to Steam is going to bring them to more eyeballs. You know, I know there's more people that shop there than, you know, so
I would
Shotgun
buy
King's
that
been
as the
successful.
engine in a heartbeat. Like,
yeah,
that would, like, the instant it becomes available.
Yeah, like that stuff is all over my head the little bit that I've dabbled with like game dev stuff with like Glenn or even just poking around with PICO-8. And I know you've mentioned like that you've dabbled in it a little bit lately. We'll probably save that more for when Randall's around. I mean, feel free to bring something up if you want. But like, I feel like, yeah, PICO-8 seems like something that's like doable. But when I dabbled, I was like, this is still a little over my head. I'm not in the right mental capacity to dive into this just right now, I guess. But, yeah, I don't know. I've just been really pumped to see, number one, them pump the brakes and be like, okay, we don't need to stick to any crazy monthly release schedule. I'm hoping that they'll, cook up some games over this year. And they have made a couple other Game Jam games that they haven't turned into full releases just yet. They have one, Super Fetch Dog, which I love the Game Jam version that's coming out soon, just on PC and whatever. So I'm just really pumped to see PUNKCAKE seemingly having some pretty good success lately. And then, yeah, just to mention Sokpop briefly too, they went from doing their monthly Patreon releases they still have a monthly Patreon subscription, but they're just like, hey, look, we don't want to be stuck to that like time frame anymore. We want to make like the game we want to make it a little bigger. We're going to release the games when we release them. They might be priced differently, maybe a little higher. But if you're like our patron at whatever level, lowest to highest, or there's other perks if you're higher up or whatever, but and you can obviously just buy the games independently too, but they're just going to kind of release games as they're done. But they were like, they put a post out in August like, hey, it feels weird. We haven't released a game like this year yet, basically. But they, right around the time that Shotgun King out, they released Stacklands, and that was like a deck building kind of survival crafting sim. I talked about that a little bit too, and that has been super successful. I think they said it sold over like 1 million copies. I saw some post about it. So like, they were already successful, I think, as it is. So I think they were just kind of like, hey, now let's like look at what we've been able to do with this. Again, not to put any words in their mouths, but like, I think they saw like, hey, look at what we were able to do with Stacklands because we saw so much success with that. Like, what if we could kind of do that with every game, like really devote all our time to it? So they've released one since then. I haven't had a chance to play it other than to just boot it up and see if it worked on my computer, because sometimes their games act a little funky, especially if I'm trying to stream them. So I was just like testing out. I think it's just called Frog's Adventure or Frog Game. It's got a real simple name, but it's got like this really awesome hand-drawn, like everything is hand-drawn and kind of like not crassly, but like kind of sloppily colored in, like almost like looks like with crayon, like kind of like a pop-up book. And it's like a point-and-click adventure, but a little more action-y. Like it's more like you point where you want your character to run and then hold down, and then they kind of run over there, and you jump to trigger a lily pad so that you can then jump, or click on a lily pad to trigger it and then jump on it and whatever. But it's just so cool to see both these studios seemingly having success and kind of seemingly like taking a step into like building some bigger games and like just being like, okay, we've got some funding behind us, or some, something that we can rest on or whatever. Or maybe Shotgun King is, bringing in some revenue from the console roulette, whatever it is. It's just like they seem a little more comfortable, and now they can just even more make what they want to make. And so I'm really excited to see what happens there.
I know that like you can't always just draw parallels between different media for like forms of media, but like it really does just like sound so familiar of like a band booking a show and being like, this is maybe the one that like will just get enough eyeballs on us, or like we'll be playing with the right bands that like people will like start to see us like in a outside of our own like sphere of friends, and like this is the one thing that's going to like, once we get eyeballs on us, then like, okay, now we can kind of like, once we've done the work of trying to get our name out there or doing the marketing or whatever, that then we can take our time and like actually sit and develop. Like there's so much of a hustle that like is front loaded into like really competitive media markets. It sucks.
Yeah,
like,
and
I
so
wish
much,
people could just make stuff at like the pace they want to make stuff.
Yeah, and the fact that there's so much luck involved in the equation, like I don't know if Shotgun King would have had the success it had if it wasn't such a success in that game jam, which brought a lot of like game developers. It got a lot of attention through that. Then it got a lot of write-ups in various magazines, and YouTube
like how many
videos
equally
and whatever.
great games or musicians or artists or whatever like just get passed over because it's so hard to find stuff and it's so hard to like get focus on you. Like it's not any fault of the product not being good enough.
Exactly. I was even thinking while I was playing Shotgun King, and again, this is not to slight the console version at all. Like I've really been having fun. Like I said, I put in a few hours already. I have like the playing on a gamepad is just a little more cumbersome. Like you kind of move, like you use the left stick or the D-pad or whatever to kind of aim. Because you can you're basically hopping one square at a time or one tile at a time as the king. So you just kind of like move the joystick octo-directionally around the king. And then it will point, like the red arrow will kind of point at the tile you're going to jump to. But then like sometimes you'll get a buff that like lets you move 2 tiles at a time. And then it gets really annoying to like move up, down, left, right, and like select the tile you want to move to, where like when you play with the mouse, you just literally hover over where you want to move and click there. So like, and then they really have added a ton of new buffs too, where like the buffs before were like, there's always a buff and a debuff. So it'll like kind of buff your squad or give you some kind of upgrade, but then upgrade the other team or downgrade you in some way. And they were a little more simplistic and easier to wrap your head around before, where it'd just be like +2 firepower, add 2 rooks with +1 health on the opposing team or something like that.
Yeah.
Now it's like there's like 3 things, like if you're on a tile next to another character, then flip this card and it becomes deactivated. But if it's activated, then it's like a little too much to read. Like it still ends up being mostly the same kind of balance to the risk reward. But it's like when I'm reading them, some of the cards, I'm like, what does that even mean? And then again, like to reread them or to check them, you got to like hit on Switch. You got to hit minus to go to like the info menu and then like hold down left or right trigger to like select from which menu you want to go through and then select through the cards, where again on the PC you just hover over the card and a little box pops up next to your cursor that tells you what it does. So
it's just the demo track being a better version than the overproduced studio version.
Yeah, kinda, yeah. Which isn't always the case. I still always remember getting that deluxe version of Futures from Jimmy Eat World that came with like the demo versions of all the songs. And I was like, man, I'm kind of surprised they released this, man. Some of these demos are whack. Like this song is like not that good until you hear like them change it in the studio into a good song. But it's like, man, the bones of this weren't that great. So... and that's not to say every song, but yeah, there were a few on there where I was like, man, I love that song. And that demo, like I would have probably scrapped that if I wrote that song. I would have thought, not that great. Let's put this on a, EP or something. But
sometimes you need the
I don't know. But I know I was going to say something else about the PUNKCAKE stuff there. I kind of got off on a tangent talking about like the things I didn't like about the console version. I just like, what I was going to say was, a game that came out, I don't know if it came out right around the same time, but I have talked about it recently on the podcast and before, but Undergrave is like a pretty similar game, like a really chess-like in the sense of like every single move and turn matters, and it's kind of, again, like a turn-based roguelike situation. And that game was only $5 on Switch, and Shotgun King is $12.49 or $12.50. Still a great steal for that game.
Yeah.
But for me, I was thinking about like, man, Shotgun King is great, and it got so much attention. But Undergrave to me is a better game. Not that it matters to even compare the two. They're both just really good games. They're both awesome, and I recommend them both. But like, I'm sitting there thinking like, man, what does it take other than, again, like obviously Shotgun King had that leverage of getting noticed in the game jam. And again, being a great game and having some developers that are a little more well-known maybe or something. But I don't know. Yeah, it's just a little bit of a bummer when you're thinking like, man, there's all these other games that are just as good as this that just fly under the radar. But like you said, just like bands.
It's, dude,
like,
it
if we just get that opening slot at Beat Kitchen, we're gonna get signed.
Yeah, and then like every label, like just like game studios, or it's like, yeah, we're a label like putting together like things that we're passionate about and like promoting bands, and oops, we folded because that's a lot of fucking work to do and it's so difficult. God.
Yeah, or we got big enough and had to just, decided to sell to a bigger company and just be done with it or whatever. Yep. And then it's, it just gets sucked into the machine or whatever you want to call it,
Yep. Dog.
Yeah. It's a bit of a shame. Well, even like kind of on a different note, but this is actually in a way kind of exciting to me, or at least I'm curious. But when we had Dev Dwarf on the podcast, I guess just to talk about another time that we had an interview on the podcast, another just really awesome indie developer. They talked about the game Quomp or Comp. I don't know how you say it. QOMP from the developer Stuffed Wombat. Who's another developer who's like, I feel like all the indie developers and me too. I mean, not that I'm a developer, but I just see their games and instantly go, whoa, that looks crazy and interesting. They have a new game coming out called Mosalina, like Mona Lisa, but it's like kind of like a sim puzzle platformer. It looks crazy. I know Turd Boomerang in the Discord is always raving about that. That was also a Game Jam version as well, or Game Jam game originally, I think, as well. Or maybe they just released it randomly. But anyways, they're going to be releasing Comp 2 or Quomp 2, however you say it. But it's not made or developed by Stuffed Wombat. It's actually going to be developed and published by Atari. Somehow they they sold the IP to Atari, and it's just like, and Atari, there was some other
What is Atari doing buying IP?
There was some other weird like indie kind of arcade puzzle action platformer looking thing recently. I totally forget the name of it, but you just kind of like a 1-bit, but like way more hyper and chaotic than that. And I don't know what Quomp 2 is going to look like, but I was just like, man, how did this end up happening? Like, what series of events led to this? I mean, I'm obviously happy for Stuffed Wombat. I'm assuming that's good for them, but
yeah,
I don't know. I'm curious to see. But it's just so weird how all that stuff shakes out, I guess. Yeah. But I don't know. What have you been doing gaming wise or non-gaming wise? I mean, like I've mentioned, like I played a little bit of Pikmin 4 still, but I'm talking about that next week, and I'm just talked about it on the Save It for the Cast, so I don't have a whole lot more to add.
Yeah, I mean, part of why I wanted to do the like just free for all, like Save It for the Cast like format for the entire episode is just like it takes effort to like come up with meaningful things to say about games. Like
it does.
I do try to like, it may not show, but like I do try to put in some effort into this. And like there, like the past couple weeks, like I've just been like so stressed at work and life and like so busy and not have the time to like play games in any meaningful, like active or engaging way, and like, or not as a way to just like de-stress. And like,
right.
I remember that was a reason why we started having the Save It for the Casts in general, is just like, we were starting to feel burnt out on playing games, like at a, like, we need to come up with new things to do at least if every week, or like when we would record 2 in a week. And like, I was just playing games at a way like that felt really clinical, and just being like, all right, I need to like come up with X number of things to say about this, because like I want to like do the developer justice. I want to like actually have something interesting to say, and not just be like reading a description of the game. And then like after a while that became like really taxing, and I was like not playing games for fun anymore. And I was like, I need to like slow down my consumption of this media that I love and that I care a lot about. But I'm just like, no, I need to like figure out what my relationship is with this like form of media, and like still prioritize like how, like what it brings joy to me, and like how I feel about it. And like, I think like we did hit like a really good sweet spot with doing like our format now, and I've been enjoying it. But like, this was just a case of life being a fucking lot all at once.
Yeah, dude, yeah.
And so I was just like,
I'm in the same boat, just starting this new job.
Right.
So I'm like, man, I've been fried. Like, I've been like playing just whatever I feel like playing, not thinking about like, oh, I got to think of something to play for the podcast. I'm like, I'll figure it out when the time comes. We'll either we'll figure it out.
Yeah, and like I booted up Pikmin 3 because I was like, all right, I'm going to start my next step on my journey to play Pikmin 4, which is a game that I am very looking forward to playing, but like
Did you beat 2? Did you finish it?
I didn't beat 2. I'm like 80% of the way done with 2, or at least to seeing credits, but I wanted to at least like start 3 to like kind of remember how that game played, and like it took me the entire night because I didn't want to restart, because apparently you can only have one file in Pikmin 3. And so I was like starting from like day 22, and I was like, all right, I'll go into it. I just finally got all 5 Pikmin. Like, I'll be able to figure it out from context. And it took me the entire night to remember how to play.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, you know what? I can't do this right now. I just don't have the bandwidth to like do something that like I genuinely enjoy, but like it's going to take some work, and I just am so exhausted and like can't do anything other than play Genshin Impact, because I don't need to have my brain on for that.
I feel that, because kind of when I don't want to say fizzled on Pikmin 4, because I definitely intend to pick it back up when I have more time, and I still have been dabbling here and there, but like once I got to a point where I only had kind of new areas to explore, I was like, I don't want to really dive into something new. If I'm already kind of just combing these areas and like clearing out these last couple caves or getting that one last treasure, now that I unlocked the, the electric Pikmin that I can throw higher, whatever I unlock to be able to get back there with a new item or power up, I'm like, I'll do that, but I'm not really committed to like exploring a new area and taking it all in and like trying to commit it to memory.
Yep.
Like there is that like different mode. And yeah, I've definitely, like, same thing with Shotgun King. And that's I think that's actually the main reason I was kind of like, oh, what are all these new buffs? I mean, they are a little more complex, but I was like expecting to dive right back into that game. And even like it controlled a little differently than I thought. Like, again, in the other game, or in the way it works, you just like use the mouse, and wherever you're pointing is kind of where your gun is aiming and where you're going to move. It's like kind of just doubles as both, where like on the Switch, you got to use the left stick for movement, right stick for aiming. There's just like way more buttons that you got to like hold down and this and then press another button. There's just way more where when you're with the mouse, it's just like click that power up and it activates it. You don't have to like go into the power up menu and then press a button, and it's just like whatever. But it's becoming more intuitive. But again, yeah, I was expecting to just pick up this game that I already knew how to play and dive right into it. And now it's like, oh man, there's like all these new modes. I got to go through all these different ranks that get tougher and tougher. There's like 15 different ranks now. Mm-hmm. I've already cleared 4 of them, or 3 or 4 of them. But it did suck me back. The other day, I was like playing a run just last night, and I was like blasting away. I had all my spread was really wide, but I was really powered up. So I was just like standing in the back row and just blasting all the pawns away. But then I was like on I think you have to get through 12 or 12 floors, and then there's like a boss battle to finish a run. And I was on like maybe the 9th or 10th floor, and I was like, I'm cruising at this point. Like, I'm just blowing everybody away. They can't even move. The power-ups I had were perfect. And then I blew away one too many pawns, and then it made the queen's line of sight open to me. And it just immediately, I literally, like, I was just like playing like just like watching TV in the background, and I just like audibly was like, fuck. And it's been a long time since I've been that sucked into like a run of a roguelike, where I was like, I thought I had it in the bag, moving on to the next rank, good. And I was like, fuck. Oh my God, it got me good. I was pissed.
But it was game design there.
It was a good feeling. I was kind of back in like that. Oh man, it's been a while since a game has really made me feel that way. Like, I can get sucked into a game, especially when I'm streaming, but like, man, it's been a long time since I've just playing on my handheld, like didn't even really have the volume on, was just like playing it mindlessly with the TV or a podcast on or something. And I was like, man, I was sucked into that run, and I was pissed when I lost.
Oh man.
But yeah, I totally know what you mean about like, yeah, the like overload and like, yeah, because even like when Randall and I were first talking about starting the podcast in general, is partially because like he had moved away and we were not keeping in touch as much since he had Fiona, and he was more busy. And then we were both talking about, when we did talk, we'd talk about, man, we don't really play games as much anymore. And we kind of started the podcast with the intention of like, oh yeah, we're going to play games and it's going to be way more fun. And then, yeah, it got to like, oh man, recording every week and having shit to say is overwhelming, especially when we did those like hour-and-a-half episodes, or like, we really used to come armed with like a game or two each every episode. And
yes,
now it's
let's keep talking about how hard we work and how much. Yes, people should.
How hard it is to play games.
So great.
It's so hard, man.
All of them. But yes, no, like I just had to catch us because I was like, hold on.
Yeah, let's commiserate together.
Yeah, a little bit of that, but I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about, I don't know, making games recently, and like just making music, making art in general. And like part of the thing is that I've been doing more than playing games is like I've been watching a ton of PICO-8 like game dev videos and like learning how that language works, because I am still very much like completely new to coding. Like I don't really know it, and it's a completely new language and skill for me to learn. So like I'm and kind of in that mode already recently, just in how I've been approaching learning new instruments and approaching learning like how synthesizers work. Like I've kind of gotten to a point where I'm more patient and able to be bad at a thing for extended periods of time, and which was a skill I did not have younger when I was
just
younger.
Gonna say that's good for sure. Yeah.
Like if I was not immediately good at a thing, I would drop it and like only focus on the things that I felt comfortable with. But like now I am very proud to say that I have been putting a lot of time into PICO-8 development, and I still barely understand how to make a button press do a thing on the engine. Like, I got to
definitely. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say like I've been doing like I had been doing a lot in the music engine, and kind of got to the point where I was like not struggling against the limits of it, but like becoming comfortable with like what the extent I am able to do in that, and like kind of realizing that I'm getting basically all of the like juice out of that thing. Like there's not really anything that I don't understand how to use in the music engine. And so I was like, this will be fun to like get to that level like in the regular game development, because I know there's a lot of hard limits and stuff and how you can code games. So what I was doing was like trying to be like, I understand one aspect of this engine. Like, let me try to learn a second aspect. And I was like, oh God, I have no idea what the fuck anything is like going on here. Like it's fun. Like it's really fun to like learn the extreme basics, and like I think it'll be hilarious when I have a like end product as like the worst quality game, but with like decent sounding music.
Hey, that goes a long way. That can make a pretty just mediocre game way better, just having a good soundtrack.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting to just like think about games from now a like game. And I don't want to also oversell like my perspective in like game dev, but like
but from the opposite end, from like the creator's side, as opposed to just the like I'm enjoying this game. It's like there's part of me that always like worries a little bit about that, because I notice like when I've like talked about I can't remember who I was even talking to. I think I was even talking about games from the developer of Undergrave. They have a bunch of games like Raven's Hike, a bunch of games that you Red Ronin. I don't know. There's a bunch of games that they have that utilize kind of a similar mechanic where you basically go like up, down, left, right, and you kind of slide all the way across the screen. They're not all exactly like that, but they basically utilize that same input. And I was like raving to this other developer, like, oh, you got to check out all their games. These are awesome. I was like, I think I was streaming Undergrave, and they were just like, oh, it looks like they're just using the same mechanics all the time. Like once you can kind of see behind the curtains, you're like picking it apart, like how it works. And it's like, even with like music and stuff, like when you're trying to figure it out, it's a little different in that regard, because sometimes you just want to learn how to play a song for the fun of it, like as opposed to like the functionality of it, I guess, if that makes sense. But
I think the like the novelty of a thing will wear off, but I think you get a much deeper appreciation for the form as a whole. And like because there's a lot of like listening to bands or like songs or stuff where like if you've played music for a while, you kind of listen to it as like, they're kind of just overusing this one hook, or like there's not a lot of effort put into like this chord progression. And then, but at the same time, then when you encounter something that's fucking good. You're just like, this is I don't even understand how this is made.
Yeah,
like,
how did they even think of this? Yeah, exactly.
And so yeah, it's a double-edged sword, and like I can already kind of feel that happening where I'm like, oh no, I can't turn back after I've crossed this Rubicon. Like, things will forever change for me.
Yeah, well, that's one thing, though, that seems cool. I mean, obviously, there's always bad apples or bad seeds or whatever, but for the most part, in like the indie development community or the game developer community, at least the stuff I see on like social media and whatever, it's mostly like people, when they see something they think is cool, it's like everyone like gathers around and like, oh, this is amazing, like awesome work. It's like, so it is kind of cool that it is like, it feels real supportive in that regard. People aren't like jealous. I mean, again, I'm sure there are people that get that way, but like, it doesn't seem like there's like a lot of jealousy when somebody comes up with something cool. It's more like, holy shit, that's awesome. I can't wait to like either try to figure out how to do that or just play it myself and enjoy it. Like, I don't know. I love to see that all the time. Like in the comments threads, it's like the people who comment are usually game developers that made other cool games where I'm like, oh yeah, they made that. And it's cool to see them all just like patting each other on the back, basically,
It's interesting to like see if like, maybe there's an overlap of it being like a younger art form, and so like the generation that is making the independent version of its media is also of like a different generation than like other art forms, like that's way different than people making indie music or indie films. Like those are completely different generations of people.
That's true. Yeah.
And different, all other things, different like cultures, groups, like geography. It's a lot of interplay.
Yeah, there's so many, just various things. And again, as something like a game, having success with a game jam release can go so far. It's not just PUNKCAKE, obviously. Like, talked about Electhead and stuff like that on the podcast, and there's just so many games that have started out as game jam games that even there's tons that I didn't even know. I think, what was it? There was some game that somebody mentioned to me recently, and I was like, holy shit, I was going to say VVV, but I don't think that was it. But it was something of like that notoriety where I was like, holy, that started out as a game jam game? I can't think of it now, but I don't know. It was like a big indie game, that where I was like, man, I had no idea that started out as like a prototype or something.
Oh, I just remembered a topic that I did want to like touch on tonight was that part of what I want to do and how I'm going to like approach kind of game dev and as a general concept or like a creative endeavor on my side of things is like, I want to make the same game in multiple engines. Like I'm starting off with like certain ideas of like game ideas that I've had for a while. And like, I'm starting it in PICO-8 because that's going to be like kind of the first actual engine that I learn. But I'm very interested in like, once I have created a working version of that, like kind of in the same way that like, I want to do a song in like every genre and be like, what does it sound like if I do this? Like, what can I keep like as the core part of this song and transform it into a different genre? I'm like, part of me is like, what is going to be how will I be able to use a different engine to make the same game? Like, I think it's really interesting of a concept. And like, I don't think that that's a thing that I see very often. Like I usually like if a game is a sequel to an indie game is made, it's kind of made in the same engine. Like it's not a necessity that like sequels when they were like linked to hardware, like Mario on the NES to Super Nintendo to N64, like there was a different engine for like all of those by necessity,
like a different platform essentially,
and so like that kind of really isn't the case with indie games made now. Like Unity's been around a while, like you don't see a lot of like, I don't know, like I want to see more games that are made like on a homebrew NES, and then they have the exact same version of it. Like Celeste is the only one I can think about.
I was literally just thinking of Celeste. You got like the other one, which is not really, it's different, but you have like, we've talked about Micro Mages, which is a homebrew NES game. And then that you can buy that on Steam, But I don't think there's anything different about it. Like, it's obviously not an NES ROM, but it's like, whatever. It's the same game, essentially. It's just not running on NES hardware. But the only other things I can think of is like cards with personalities, getting like the PICO-8 to like full
and like Shotgun King
upgrade.
Like
Shotgun King.
When you try to like proof of concept or like game jams are kind of that, where like, but that's also like kind of similar to like doing a demo version of a song. Like you have the thing made, like you aren't like, there's not really any substantive difference. It's just the performance that's different.
Yeah, it's actually cool. It's funny you mentioned that too, because there's actually Fletch in the Discord has made games in multiple game jams, but made a game in our last game jam as well. But one of their games, Speedcat, which was a PICO-8 game that they're currently working on, I think a Godot engine version with like, just taking advantage of some of that stuff. And then Turd Boomerang, who I mentioned earlier, and Protractor, I think is their like teammate from the last jam. They made the game Smited, which was a really awesome like farming sim game on PICO-8. And they're also working on like a game maker. Maybe it's Godot, maybe it's Game Maker. I'm not sure, but an upgraded version of that as well. They've teased it a little bit in our Discord, and it looks awesome. I mean, it still has that PICO-8 flavor, but just having the like being able to build what you built in there and then upgrade it is like, yes,
more versions of the same game. Like,
yeah. Like, don't necessarily make a sequel, but like even how we've talked about with like the Wild Guns and Pocky and Rocky and like those like kind of more like those reimaginings where it's like it's kind of a remake of the original game, it's kind of a sequel, it's kind of a new game. It's just like all of those things in one, and I know that's easier said than done. I mean, those 3 games that that studio has put out are masterpieces. The Pocky and Rocky, well, that might be overstating it a little, but Ninja Saviors, Wild Guns, and Pocky and Rocky, those 3 like reimagining remakes are incredible. Like some of the coolest modern retro games I've played in years.
Yeah, but I just love seeing, like, in the same way that I love listening to like different versions of songs. Like I just like seeing what like the creator or author is like, what are the core parts of this piece that I'm creating and how can I translate that in different ways? And I think that with games, like if you've played like games on a lot of different platforms, that's kind of built into how you consume like the art form, where it's like, oh, okay, I've played like Kirby on Game Boy and Kirby on Wii U. Like I understand what a Kirby game is, even though the like games like vary so massively. And like I kind of want that level of like fleshing out of concepts for indie games. Like I want more versions of everything.
It's true.
I'm a glutton.
There's so many games I play where I'm like, I'm glad the developer's like moving on and working on a new thing or whatever. They're, moved on to a bigger studio, whatever the case may be. But there are times where I'm like, man, I wish there's like a lot more ideas on that, a lot more meat on that bone. I wish they could explore that further, whether it's a sequel or however they go about it. But yeah, there's so many games where I like kind of want more. And I know that's part of what makes a game great though. Like, part of what makes a Leckhead so memorable is like by the time you're done with it, you're like, God damn it, it's already over. Like you're almost mad at the game, but that's what keeps, or a Short Hike, that's what keeps those games in your brain. You're just like, I got to go back and play that game and be there again,
Yeah, and it is such a fine line of not overstaying your welcome and like not doing too much or like finding a scope that you can make reasonably, but also at the same time, I just want more. Like I just want.
I think that's why like the kind of arcadey roguelikes have grabbed me so much over the last few years, because it's like if the mechanics of a game and the vibe or whatever really sink their teeth into me, it's like I can pretty much limitlessly play that game if the urge strikes me. Whereas like, a game that has an ending, unless it's like Super Mario World, where for whatever reason I can just keep playing that game and it never gets any less fun. But like most games, like the more I play Mario 3 even, I'm kind of like, I like it, but I don't really need to play it again,
Yeah. And maybe it's also like a weird part of my brain that's like, I don't know. I need a new version of a thing. Like, I can't keep playing the same old version of a thing before. But I was like, even recently, I was like, I wish that there was like another Cross-Neek game. And I was like, just play the game that exists. Like, it's endlessly playable. It's just a puzzle game. You don't need a different version with like a different soundtrack or skins.
Or like a new twist to the mechanics or something, you know.
Like,
yeah, there's definitely times where the sequel or the follow up or whatever is unwarranted or whatever whatever word you want to use, but it's like, okay, this doesn't necessarily need to exist. But, I don't know. I'm never opposed to like a game or a concept getting a little more love if there's more ideas out there, you know. And I do love that games can get more of like a patch or a DLC or that kind of, like they've done with Shotgun King, you know. They've just been able to keep adding to the game. And I think with feedback from the people who have been playing it, you know, I think they had a pretty diehard community online with that game. So, I don't know, but I'm curious to see what you do with the PICO-8 or just development stuff in general.
Yeah.
Would you go like the Unity route, do you think, or Game Maker, or do you have another engine in mind or would you go Godot since it's also,
I've not looked at Godot at all. Like, I'm still like trying not to like over extend myself and like get burnt out, because like I tried Unity honestly a decade ago at this point, like so long ago, and I couldn't get, like, the possibilities I think were a little overwhelming, and I didn't want to do, like, at the time it was stuff like sprite based or art based platformers were the majority of indie games that were being made.
Yeah.
And so like there were very few, I can't remember what, like there was like a lot of the like weird art games made in that era were like first person like camera games of exploration. Like I'm thinking Stanley Parable is like the most accessible.
Yeah, but like I know what you're talking about. Dear Esther and stuff like that.
Yeah, Gone Home. And so like those were kind of your two options of what indie games were at the time. It really was just like puzzle platformer or first person adventure.
Yeah, first person, like basically point and click adventure, but you just have control of your character. Yeah.
Yeah. So I not being like happy with either of those as like what I wanted to make, like I just kind of abandoned it. And then by the time that PICO-8 came out and like plenty of other engines, like there has been like a decade of people making entirely new genres that didn't even exist before, and like so many new spaces and like a history of games to build upon. So like I have benefited greatly from a lot of people doing the work in the meantime.
Yeah. And well, one cool thing about PICO-8 too, and I don't know if you've dabbled with this, but because like I think the PICO-8 like software, I think we probably got it as part of like one of the itch.io bundles that we bought or whatever. But I think standalone, you can buy it for like $20, and then it gives you access to like the BBS database or BSS. I forget what it's called, but I think it's BBS. And you can like basically anyone who makes a game on there and uploads it to the BBS, you can just like upload it in or download it and play it right from like the actual PICO-8. And then if you have it uploaded in there, you can actually just like pull up the code for the game and look at it and analyze it, and you copy it and okay, that's how they did that function. I mean, again, I don't know how to read that stuff, so it was all over my head, but
I got
it's cool that you can do that.
A little too big for my britches, and after watching a couple hours of tutorials was like, I got a good handle on this. I'm going to open up the code to Alpine Alpaca, and I'm going to know exactly what's going on. And like, I opened it up and I was like, I can't understand a single fucking thing they've done in this. Like, this is speaking
of PICO-8 wizards, Johan Peitz. I don't know if I'm pronouncing their last name right, but oh my God, they also have developed PicoCAD, which is literally CAD software on PICO-8. They have like the Pico Synth, which is like a full-blown synthesizer. They actually have a Patreon now as well, which is not a monthly thing. They're just kind of like, hey, whenever I release a game, you get it. And then again, that you can buy them standalone. But I think they're mostly developing in PICO-8. which is really cool to see. I'm loving seeing people making PICO-8 games and charging money for them. Like, these are good, awesome games that
absolutely
have no reason to be free. I mean, it's awesome that some of them are, but, I have no problem paying money for a game developed in PICO-8. Like, very, very awesome. I love seeing it, to be honest.
And, like, a very similar thing is I've been trying to actually learn more piano now than I have in the past.
Heck yeah.
And, like, that was honestly one of the reasons why I joined one of my bands, Sandwiches, was because I was like, if I'm in a band, I'll force myself to learn how to play this instrument.
Yeah. Heck
and like, I don't know. I did get better at it in that period of time, but like now I've actually started to like sit down, and turns out all you need to do is practice. Wow. It turns out everybody who has always just told me to practice is absolutely correct, and that's all you need to do.
Yep.
But it's difficult. It's mind numbing. It's like very difficult to sit down and be repeatedly bad at something over and over and over again. And when
I first started learning guitar, I still remember like going to my lessons. I was like in 4th grade or something, and like learning like Mary Had a Little Lamb and Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. It's like, this is not why I fucking got a guitar. I wanted to learn like, I think the first like real song I learned was Push by Matchbox 20. And I was like, okay, like this is at least some real chords, Yeah.
But, and it's perfectly possible to like the same way that like I played bass for years, like, you do it by experience, and like you learn a little bit, and then by actually doing the thing, you just kind of force yourself to learn it. But at the same time, like I'm finally using like my pinky in playing piano, and that is something that I've always avoided because I'm like, it's just not strong enough. Yeah. I've never used this before. And as a consequence of learning how to use my pinky in like piano, I'm suddenly able to hit notes I never could on bass before. A thing that, as someone who played bass for a decade in a band that performed a lot, maybe I should have developed that skill a decade ago instead of being too lazy.
Yeah, especially when we like play our songs twice as fast live.
Yes.
So,
but like I'm suddenly like, oh, this is a lot easier because I practiced. It's like, I'm such a fucking idiot. Like not actually just sitting down and doing the thing.
Dude, I gotta say though, that's actually awesome. Between the game dev stuff and practicing piano, the fact that like you've felt fried with work and whatever, but still had like the mental energy and capacity, or maybe just determination or whatever. But like to like, I'm gonna dedicate some time to this, because like again, with me just starting up this new job, and to be fair, how any new job, just taking in so much new information. There's like all this computer software I'm learning, all this like I'm just like, I don't have time to learn new rules in a video game. I'm just like, I just want to play. Again, like back to Shotgun King, I was like, this isn't the Shotgun King I know. Come on, man, I need to just play this. And then again, Pikmin, like I don't want to explore a new area. Come on, man, I need to just play something that I'm like already basically like sleepwalking my way through. So obviously here we could probably talk like some video game stuff or non-video, we could just chit chat here all night long. So at the interest of just keeping this episode kind of, reasonably, manageable to edit and whatever, let's wrap it up here. But realistically, you're probably going to hear more, John and I are just going to keep chatting here some more. So you'll probably hear some more of this, in the, upcoming Save It for the Cast, proper episode or whatever coming up. But, yeah, for now, why don't we wrap it up here for this week, John? And, you can find us on the internet at pursuingpixels.com and pretty much everywhere else. And otherwise, we'll catch you next week. And until then, take care.
Bye.
Oh, I'm getting a little freeze frame on you there, John. But you still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I couldn't hear you there for a sec.
Gotcha. Oh, I wasn't saying anything.
Oh, it froze. I like lost you for like a good minute there. So
gotcha.